first of all, thank you everyone for having us. My name is Natasha. As was introduced, I'm currently the Director of Research and Development at John Hancock, and I was also one of the original co-founding members of LOFT, Lab of Forward Thinking. It's the Innovation Lab Network for Manulife Financial.
I'm Dusan Koljensic. My last job was VP of UX at Fidelity Labs and head of product design. We were trying to get them to put fireplace on these screens, just to make it a little cozier, but I guess not.
Oh, well, this is supposed to be a fireside chat, so you'll just have to pretend that there's a burning fire somewhere in the back and the AC is not blasting as it feels to be. Maybe that's just me. My coffee will keep me warm. So before we get started, quick question just to get a sense of our audience. How many of you currently work or have worked in the corporate innovation space? Oh, so a good amount, okay. And how many of you are familiar with the term Chatham House rules? Oh, I love this. Okay, you put your hand down. So I actually stole this term from the United Nations, and what the Chatham House rules basically explain is that whatever we talk about in this room for the next 20 or so minutes, you're free to talk about that afterwards with colleagues, friends, family, but that nothing that we talk about or that you go on to share will be specifically attributed to any one person or any one organization. So I like to kind of start any talk out with that, just in the spirit of being open and candid, because innovation is a very ambiguous, vague space. And I think there's a lot of war stories and notes that we can all collectively share and learn from together in this room. So it's going to be much more helpful in cultivating that open conversation. So to get us started, we had the chance to chat about this a little bit a few days ago. And the first thing that came up was, what is innovation? What does that even mean? You want to kick us off? What are your thoughts?
Sure, and this is just my personal opinion. It's if you have that hype curve, innovation is way down the slope at this point. I read this interesting article that said that this year I think more innovation labs have closed than have opened. So the whole idea of innovation for the sake of innovation, or that ambiguous term driving what these organizations are doing, is kind of at the exit. Instead, the title was kind of a little provocative. Basically, the idea is that over time I actually had a chance to work in various capacity with various labs. Back in my Sapient times, we kind of helped companies that started labs kind of seed first initial projects. Every single one I think that I've worked with has closed at this point. Hopefully not because of me.
What a track record.
Maybe. But then later, as I started working with organizations, basically the ones that survive were the ones that have actually shifted towards much clearer understanding of what the purpose is. What is the return on investment? What is this organization trying to create? Whether it's PR, which is okay, or a catalyst for change across the organization, which is okay as well, or whether its objective is to bring real new products to the organization, and actually impact revenue. And what I found along the way is the more you're grounded into kind of reality and kind of revenue objectives and things like those, and the more you understand that this is all about the return on investment, the more chance you have of creating real impact and creating something new.
So that's an interesting perspective, because from John Hancock and Manulife, when we had first started on our innovation journey, we very much thought that was going to be a key KPI that we would report back on, and that a lot of what we'd be able to do would be immediately tied back to driving revenue and new business. 5 years later, it's not so much the story, and what we really realized, ironically, given this title of the talk, was that the biggest kind of change and catalyst that we implanted in the organization was really a cultural shift. And more so, ironically, it was not just among embracing emerging technologies, but embracing how we look at them, how we use them, and employing methodologies like design thinking, putting the customer first, which I'm sure every company in this room that's represented would be able to communicate as a core value nowadays. So for us, it was very much, we thought we would be contributing to these new products and driving innovation and catalyzing an entire industry as really as conservative and traditional as financial services. And it ended up being a complete shift towards something different, which is now very much design and design research.
A similar thing. I've seen similar things. I mean, ultimately, creating new products that generate revenue is really hard. There's no two ways about that. If you look at any kind of large institution, like especially financial institutions, we're talking about kind of billions of dollars of revenue, tens of billions of dollars of revenue. If you think about how much new revenue you would have to create every year, to actually move the needle at all, on organic growth of the organization, it just becomes a statistically unlikely proposition unless, if you're actually kind of driving the consumer focus, bottom-up kind of innovation. Mm-hmm. The reason why I'm saying this is one of the things that I've been thinking about is how almost the labs do things that are too small. Like they don't have grand enough vision. It's like if you're in an organization that is making $30 billion a year, like the idea that you're coming up with needs to be humongous and big. And then you can actually be much more persuasive in kind of making the case for investing in it and really kind of, getting that kind of C-level focus on it, rather than kind of thinking about what is the next app or something like that. Like unless that is the thing that's going to make $3 billion. But
it's an interesting point that you bring up scaling concepts, scaling ideas, and then more so just adding on to that, what methodology and what approach the organization is even putting forth to understand the scalability or reach, viability, right, of a concept. And we talked about this in our conversation that a lot of labs are aiming too small, and the organizations of which we're a part, 30,000 plus people are not built to scale small ideas.
Yep. No, that's absolutely true. I was going to actually kind of shift the topic a little bit, kind of, because it has a little to do with scale. As you pointed out, kind of the large organizations are optimized to talk to like millions of customers. So every time I have seen kind of an issue on the scaling side, it's so funny, in these labs, actually coming up with something cool and building it was never a hard thing. There are a lot of super smart, brilliant people that can actually execute on anything. Figuring out what the right thing to build is, so that you're not going in 100 different directions because you just don't have the number of people for it. And then figuring out how to actually scale it to those 80 million. Those were always the biggest problems that we've had. And when you look at scaling, the problem was always everybody starts these things thinking ooh, I have built in 50 million customers. That's awesome. I can crush this. Well, not really. That distribution channel is already packed with stuff that's going out to those 50 million customers. You can't just, come up with your little thing and go hey, can you squeeze this, into your, mailing campaign together with, all of, 150 other things that you're trying to push through? These are the issues. You have to be, hyper-realistic about how the core operates and what you can borrow and how you can actually engage with them in order to scale these things. And that's what I'm saying. If the idea is humongous with a humongous kind of potential, you can make the case for this. If you come up with 50 different ideas, imagine that these guys now have to hit their customers with 50 things that we don't know are going to succeed. So it's kind of, the model still needs to be thought through, but ultimately the most successful organizations I've seen look at innovation as the whole kind of ecosystem and ultimately the integral part of the business. This is not something you do on a side. This is something that you have to integrate. And then, sorry, I just like ran.
Keep going.
The tricky thing with that becomes like, once you start integrating into business and your horizon of revenue starts shrinking, your ideas start actually getting closer and closer to core. So it's a chicken or the egg, really, and it's hard to kind of, get the exact right balance in that whole thing.
And an interesting part to what you brought up was a question that I'm sure many of us have battled and tried to go to bat for, which is, are we even building the right thing? I think the exercise that we went through before this was brilliant in showing that half an hour of talking to a person and trying to understand what their wants and needs are, what they're trying to accomplish through purchasing or partaking in this product or service, that's what's going to get us to the sweet spot, not 7 people homogenous in their demographics coming up with these solutions for something that could impact millions of people. And at least from Loft, that's where we really saw the uptick of design research and primary user research kind of take hold. When we were first starting that journey, I remember talking to people in our organization saying, hey, if I were to tell you, go out and prototype something, sketch it out really quick, and then show it to someone on the street to get feedback, the immediate response that I was getting was a look of terror, saying, am I even allowed to do that? Are we going to get in trouble? Is there some mysterious Manulife cop that's going to come behind me and say, you're not allowed to do that? So there was really this fear-based culture of talking to people, which was insane. And it took us a year. It took us 1 year, maybe 11 months, I might be stretching it, to work through with legal a user agreement that would even allow us to go and talk to people and users and start that behavior.
Yeah. It's, when we had a chat about this, what that reminded me of is that different in terms of kind of having design processes integrated into the way of thinking, different organizations are in different places. And it's also super, super important to kind of realistically assess where you are in order to understand what will actually create the most impact. So what I'm trying to say is whereas this was the article, I think InVision sent it out. I don't know if there are any InVision people here. But about, what constitutes the 5 stages of design-led companies or something of that sort. I'm totally paraphrasing, it was a long time ago, but it's the first stage is just kind of basic, we're gonna hire a UX person to kind of drop some wires before we start. The second one is doing some basic research. The third one is now using kind of data as an input and, analytics into kind of deciding what to do. The fourth one is actually driving experimentation, directly with people to actually drive some of this change. And then the fifth one is actually using design thinking methodologies and ways of thinking to drive and impact business decisions. So whereas you will have some organizations where just getting people to kind of start talking about ideas is a big deal. The organization I was recently in, is quite far in that stage. One of the best outcomes of the lab were actually the fact that design strategy started getting embedded at the L1, the C level of the organization. And essentially, every time, a leader of a whole vertical, wanted to kind of think about a future and make decision, they would actually kind of have conversations with customers, create customer journeys, understand the archetypes and prototypes, understand who they're talking to, and ultimately have design strategy support while they were making these decisions. So the impact can be humongous at all different levels, but you can't actually jump. If the organization is just trying to kind of figure out how to think about customers, and you try to kind of force the leadership to kind of now use this every time they make a decision, that's not going to go far.
It's unrealistic. And I think we just got a note that says we're open to start taking audience questions.
That was quick.
Yeah, this presentation generated a lot of great questions, so let's get into it. First of all, what are your thoughts on how to establish an innovation mindset across an entire organization versus an innovation group, rather?
How much time do we have? TBD, that's what I'm still working on, to be honest. But I can speak to this briefly, that when we started our kind of journey on this, one of the first things that we did was identify catalysts, and we identified people across the organization, different segments, different geographies, who had expressed interest in learning about design thinking, in lean startup methodologies, in primary user research. And we started honestly just going about it in a very guerrilla, grassroots fashion. We would put together these kind of user testing parties where we would visit one business unit per month and just say, hey, do you have something that we can get feedback on? There's no budget required. There's no time. We're going to take care of it as part of the lab. We're just trying to really instill this idea of talking to people and of practicing design thinking. And when we first got that started, quite honestly, it was me pinging a bunch of my friends around the organization saying, can you please come and show up for 45 minutes? And that grew to a community of almost 700 people over a course of about 2 years. So I would say finding and tapping people on the shoulder who express that interest and have that enthusiasm, early on, because they're going to be some of your biggest champions.
Great, and our next question is calling it a lab a misnomer and mistake. What's your take on the labeling?
Yeah, calling it a lab sucks.
We don't have white coats. No one really got it.
I don't know. I was fighting at some point to like change the name into just about anything. Yeah, I don't have anything more than that.
Hey, one last question.
Let me backtrack. Actually, that was kind of like short and tongue in cheek. Yes, names matter. It's names matter because names create meaning within broader organizations. And I will give you a silly example. You create something with the name of lab, you give it a little bit more latitude, suddenly the whole rest of the organization goes like, why do they get to play, with cool stuff? We can do all of this stuff. So to an extent, the good things that comes out of that is the fact that the rest of the organization goes like, well, why are they better than us? Like, we can come up with the same stuff and execute at the same level of quality. And that drives people to kind of, start actually doing it where they are. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to create an organization that has that kind of purpose. Having said that, the word itself has kind of lost the meaning, the same as innovation and stuff. Is it better? All right.
Very good. Thank you.